Well, good morning. It could be afternoon, close to afternoon for some of you folks. I want to take another minute and thank John and Jane for a fantastic kickoff. They included such important material that you will find fills in a lot of the gaps and connects with what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm the program guy, and I've been doing this work of building meaningful programs for 43 years in prosecutors' offices in the area of, and I should stop and say, we all throw around that word collaboration like it's something that goes in our grants and it's just something you do. True collaboration is hard work. We won't have time today, but the back end of this presentation is usually a steps to true collaboration section that I do. And I promise you, it is tough time-wise, it is tough talent-wise, it is tough building the kinds of relationships and maintaining the kinds of relationships and spending the time you need to spend doing the cross-training that's necessary to understand your colleagues and why they do the things they do and how they do them. My work over the years has been in the area of domestic violence, homicide and gangs, sex assault, elder abuse, human trafficking, predatory white-collar crime and fraud, child abuse, victims' rights, mass tragedy, building diversion programs for youth and adults and for substance abusers, restorative justice on the back end of the criminal justice system, witness protection, cold case, innocent projects, and probably the most fun I had was becoming a teacher at the national level through the Department of Justice on how you build collaboration. And all I can tell you is I'm going to talk about Denver, but I don't want you to pay attention to what it is that we do in Denver because we're a unique environment, as are you. And so everything has to be customized for the environment that you're living in and working in. We started talking seriously about witness protection in the early 90s, and that became very front and center in the late 90s. For those of you who know Denver and our love of football, we had a young, talented cornerback murdered on a New Year's Eve by a very nasty gang of drug dealers. And that taught us that we needed to up our game when it came to witness protection. And to be honest with you, we were the Cub Scouts, and we went to the source of talent, to the U.S. Marshal's office, and they nurtured us to build a program that we now have. And so they get a lot of credit and still should be getting credit from you because they are wonderful to teach you the elemental issues of witness protection. Colonia, this is a little free warning. This has a little bit of pain to it and a little bit of trauma to it. So just bear with this 911 call. So early on to us getting very serious about witness protection, we had a young lady come in who was associated with this group that killed our cornerback. And she made her living dealing crack cocaine out of the clubs in Colorado and in Denver. And she became a witness in a case against one of the leaders. And basically, we had a very blunt, let's call it blunt without using the language that occurred, conversation with her where she told us she didn't need us. She knows how to handle herself. She can take care of anything that comes into her life. She's going to testify and she's going to get paybacks for what was done to her. That 911 call was the death squad that was sent to her house and killed her that evening, less than 8 hours after she left our office. It was the first time we ever needed to develop a sign out of the program form, which she signed, also using some colorful language, before she left our office that night. And it was a sobering time for us to realize just how intense this issue of life and death witness protection was in our jurisdiction.
Guilty on all 21 charges. That was the verdict for a suspected gang member in the fatal drive-by shooting of Denver Broncos quarterback Darren Williams 3 years ago. The jury convicted Willie Clark following an 11-day trial and a day and a half of deliberation. Clark declined to testify, citing threats made by gang members to himself and his family. He faces up to life in prison at his April 30th sentencing hearing. There was no immediate word on a possible appeal. Williams was killed at about 2 a.m. on New Year's Day, 2007. Prosecutors say Clark fired the fatal shots from an SUV that pulled up beside the rented limo Williams was riding in. Williams was 24 and in his second season with.
The interesting part about that is Willie Clark didn't want to testify. He was actually the leader or one of the leaders of that gang that he was claiming he was afraid of. So it didn't work. He was convicted. He's serving. He's never getting out of the Colorado Department of Corrections. But the basis for all of this was something that has crept into our mainstream culture, and it's in our art, and it's in our language, and it's in our music, and it's in our clothing. And it has become mainstream that you just don't snitch. And you don't snitch. And if you do snitch, you're going to face consequences. At Darren Williams' funeral, there were the opposing gang members who were involved in, they were the Houston version of the gang that killed him here. They were wearing Stop the Snitching T-shirts at the back of his funeral parlor when his mother was laying him to rest. So there are out front messages in our culture, as well as case specific messages that you just don't cooperate with law enforcement and prosecution. These statistics are a little bit old. I retired a couple of years ago. I'm kind of like the Dalmatian that can't leave the firehouse. I'm still doing work, but retired about 2 years ago. And we had 20 witnesses that had been murdered in Colorado. We had 11 witnesses who were murdered in Colorado in the past 20 years. And we finally started talking about it and started adding up the number of felony witness intimidation cases. And you're talking about a pretty significant caseload when you look at our small state.
My name is Rhonda Fields, and my son, Javad Marshall Fields, was killed on June 20th alongside Vivian Wolf, days before he was due to testify in a murder trial. Vivian and Javad were both recent graduates from Colorado State University, and he lost his life because he was not afraid to tell about a murder that he witnessed.
I'm Vivian's mother. It's been a really, really difficult journey for us. Rhonda I met like a month before Vivian and Javad engaged, and they got murdered one night without any warning because Jabal was a key eyewitness for the murder for year 2004 murder case. Without the witness, I don't think we can solve any crime. Witness is the key to solve crime and to put the really bad guys away. So it's been really hard and it's going to be harder.
And we just have to make it safe for witnesses to come forward, because if we don't, well, our society will be in anarchy. We have to make it safe for people to tell.
So Rhonda Fields is now State Senator Rhonda Fields, and was the sponsor of the Javad Marshall Fields and Vivian Wolf witness protection legislation in Colorado. And I highly recommend that if your jurisdiction, state, whatever it is not able to be supported by state legislation, that is a step forward that you need to consider. You need to consider that whole process, which we don't have time to talk about today, that whole process of educating and building the support for a comprehensive witness protection program legislation. Just as a byproduct, Representative Elijah Cummings, who passed away in the past few years, had such a federal bill, and it did not make it through Congress. It has just been reintroduced in the Senate and the House. And so I would suggest that you do a little research and learn about that. We'd be happy to send you out copies of it. I don't know the rules of the grants of what we can do like that, but it's up on the web and it's an important piece, and it creates one of the three legs on a three-legged stool if you're going to do witness protection. And that's legislation, which includes resources, dollars, true collaboration, and the building of a pool of reliable collaborators and resource delivery folks. And I'll go into a little bit of what I mean by resource delivery folks in a moment. I'm going to break this down into three parts as we discuss a quality program. And of course, it starts with tactical considerations. And then it's going to go on and it's going to talk about understanding trauma and acknowledging the trauma that your witnesses and victims have been through prior to their participation in criminal justice. And if you don't understand that, your ability to communicate with them will be greatly hampered. And then the final leg of that, and John mentioned it, I thank you for that commercial, you need to be ready to address lifestyle changes. Most folks, we've done about 450 to 500 cases up through now. And the vast majority, maybe 95% of them, are people who have challenges in their lifestyles that keep them in vulnerable situations, that keep them in an environment that's high risk, and may bring them into contact with more difficult and traumatic circumstances. But in tactical considerations, and our program is led by 3 investigators. We tease with them and call them investigators with hearts. What I mean by that is they can do this tactical stuff. They are, I remember the head of our SWAT team said, I want them to be good enough that they can drop you like a hot rock. So they are good. They are talented. They are trained. They are retrained. They are very good at what they do. But they are also fantastic at communications. And so when they're starting these communications, it's about tactical considerations, building a plan to keep people safe by building information. One of the things I should tell you about our legislation is all of our work that we do in witness protection is privileged. We keep it privileged from the prosecution team, and it's privileged from the defense, and it's privileged from every angle in our state. We have had a few judges want to take a look at these materials in camera. They've never been released. There is no precedent in our state of our records, witness protection records, ever being forced to be released. The furthest we've gone is we've had to supply a summary under the topics of like lodging, food, medical care, those kinds of things, but never specific information. However, we gather every piece of information. We do a social history, an economic history, a medical history. We collect as much information on our person or persons or families to be protected as can possibly be done. Because this is what we're building, a threat assessment. We are using the classical skills that executives protection people do, where we build a threat assessment to determine if there's an imminent and credible threat against the lives of these witnesses and victims. And as so many of you talked about earlier, although we started with threat against life, there are so many steps that are short of killing that fall under the intimidation. It's really expanded what it is that we're looking at, not just whether someone has the capacity to carry out a hit on one of our witnesses. We don't put up, and you're not going to get to see the threat assessment and the screening tools that we use, because we're not about to put that out into the stratosphere or the metasphere or whatever they're calling it these days. We will make those things available to you through this process if you want them for your jurisdiction. But we use a dynamic screening tool that will give us all the information and any changes in information that come in, and is backed up by the intelligence work that our team does. And from there, we take a first step at looking at what actions our agency will need to take to keep this person or family safe. In our experience of those 400 plus cases, we've protected a single person. We've protected a family as large as 15. And so those protections have gone from moving them across town, doing an assessment at their house and collaborating with the police department for extra safety watch, to full and complete TV movie change in identity. I mean, change in identity. Their name, their social security, their college credits, their credit ratings, their location where they live, all of those kinds of things that go into a complete identity change that you would normally expect to hear about the U.S. Marshals doing. When we're collecting this information, we work extremely closely with the Denver Police Department to collect past information, criminal histories, associations, geographical locations, the types of crimes that have been committed by these groups in the past, and do the key players in the case have the motivation and capacity to reach our person and cause harm. And it's very important. I think Jane and John alluded to this. We would have had a pretty mediocre program if we didn't have an intelligence network that expands from community to community agencies, to our local jails, to our state prisons, and to our federal corrections facilities. We have those relationships. That's part of that collaboration, that you have connections to the intelligence networks that exist in our community. And so you can see we're building a history about this person, and we're building a history about the threats against these people and who might carry them out. One big change over the last 15 years is we're now finding that rival gangs are willing to collaborate in order to carry out witness intimidation and witness harm. That was not something that we experienced in the earliest days of the program, a dozen or so years ago. This is kind of a quick overview of the first page of our form. As you can see, it says confidential, and we mean it. I will tell you, for those of you who work in prosecutors' offices, we've often had to argue with our own colleagues in the office about release of this information and the confidential nature of our statute. They are worried about protecting their cases. We're worried about protecting people. And so we've had to have more than a few conversations about, we're not giving up this material, even though it's on the same letterhead as your prosecution letterhead. One of the things I want to make is a really important point. So we've done all this work. We've got this big dossier on people and the people who may harm them. And if we think we're done when we complete that dossier, we have made a critical mistake. It is a living document. It is the basis upon which we determine if there's an imminent and credible threat, and whether we take that family or person in the program, or whether we provide some around the edges mitigation to keep them safe. But if they are signed in, that threat assessment is updated, if not every week, every day. And again, if we determine there's no credible imminent threat now, tonight it could be. If one piece of the puzzle changes, if we're not doing our jail call listening, if we're not doing our monitoring of mail, if we're not doing the kinds of things that we do with the intelligence, the gang intelligence people in the prisons, we may miss the key piece to the puzzle that's going to create safety or not create safety for our people. By the way, we never close a case. We may determine that a case after prosecution, as John alluded to earlier, is no longer needing to be as active as it once was, but it is not closed and put in a file drawer. Because retaliation, because memories are long, because it is of the violent culture environment, that paybacks are you know what. But we are looking at whether that threat is of a certain nature. Is it geographical? In other words, move them across town and there's nothing to worry about. Is it opportunistic? Is there someone about to be released from jail, from prison, who can carry out an action? Is there someone who wants to cooperate because they'll get something in return, or they'll keep their lives going if they in fact act out? And is there more needed to ensure the safety of our staff, our service providers? I'll stop and tell you a quick war story that gives a picture of this. We had a young 13-year-old girl who was developmentally disabled, and she was sold for a gangbang to a gang, a very violent gang, by her mother, who in return received some crack cocaine. And this little girl was tortured over the course of a significant amount of time. And the Denver Police Department Sex Crimes Unit did a great job and followed the trail and filed some charges. At the same time that this was going on, this young 13-year-old girl's brother, who was a member of the gang that sexually assaulted her, was dating a 21-year-old woman. And this 21-year-old woman was the victim of his domestic violence. And she reported it, and he threatened to kill her. What ended up happening was the 13-year-old girl and the 21-year-old woman created a new family. And the family needed support because the 21-year-old was also pregnant with the defendant's child and had a very high-risk pregnancy. So just giving you the quick overview, we had to deliver educational services for a disabled young girl. We had to deliver high-risk pregnancy medical care. We had to keep them safe. We had to think about where they were going to go when the case was over and where they were going to find a place to build a new life. And we had to deliver all of those services at Children's Hospital and the Mental Health Center and the education program and the specialized tutoring. We had to deliver that in a way that we were not putting the lives of those service providers in danger when our people were coming for help. So it gets complicated and thick, and that is why you have to build your collaborations early so people know what they're signing in for when they say, yes, I'll serve this sex assault victim. Yes, I'll serve this family member from a homicide case. And that is all the work that must be built into the front end of the system and updated constantly. Nice room here at the Aristocrat. Our immediate work is to make sure that the victim witness is in a safe location. We're able to do that. We have relationships with economic and policy relationships with hotels, with shelters, with medical care, with food, with everything that a family needs to carry on. And those things, again, have to be reliable and available 24/7. And I want to make just a point here about victim witness personnel. None of this gets done without them. That said, they cannot be the ones that are asked to carry out the transportation, the shopping for food and delivery of it. They are not trained in the weapons and in the field tactics to deal with the threat that could show up at any time. So as you build your program, you better rely on the victim witness personnel, but you also better rely on them in a way that they can deliver their work safely. And they're not put out there on the line. We dealt with a city up in northern New York that was doing that. And it took going to the elected official to explain the need to change that strategy. And I'm hopeful that none of you are facing that kind of predicament. We have to train our protected parties how they have to participate in this safety program. We are not protecting them, we are helping them protect themselves. Because if they're not bought in, if they're not willing to take on the issues that they must, and they're listed here on this door hanger, they have to have awareness of their surroundings. An obvious one that has been a tactic is someone befriends them, a new friend in their life. They're lonely, and they have this new friend who very likely could be a threat. The number one piece, and this was a number 3 piece when we wrote this, it's one with a bullet now, for those of you who remember the hit charts. The social networking that goes on in our country, in our world now, makes it extremely difficult to do this work. It is just a challenge to keep people off of their social networks. And of course, in today's world, tracking someone through their social networks is its own skill set. They build apps for tracking people who are using social network. I'm sure you all know about that and have your own stories. For those who are out in the community, if you drive to work or you drive to court or you drive to see your mom or whatever it is, the same exact way at the same exact time, you are giving information to the bad guys and gals that helps them build a plan to harm. They can't be telling where they're being kept. And every one of these plans has got to be case specific. They are all different, whether we're moving people out of state or whether they're keeping them in here in town or whether we're moving them down to Colorado Springs. Every case has its own case plan, and there is such diversity in the work that we have to do in order to build specific case plans. I just want to double down on the media, social media. I am too old to keep track of the new things that are coming up. My daughters were trying to give me a lesson in TikTok the other day that I just don't get. But apparently I'm in a small group of people in the United States who don't get it. It is a tool that is day-long usage, that people have chosen to use TikTok as their primary means of communication. When you take people out of all of these, Backpage is, I think Backpage is gone these days. Craigslist, whatever it is, you create not only a threat and not only information for the folks to want to do harm, but you also create challenges to your cases. The other side of that is, for whatever reason, the folks who commit these crimes seem to like to talk about their plans on social media. So you have a responsibility to monitor social media, because it's going to give you intelligence information, background information, updated strategies, updated communications about the plans of the folks who are going to who want to create harm in the lives of your witnesses. Just a couple of techniques, and I'm going to start with the bottom one. Because we've done a lot of human trafficking cases, and because we keep people in safe houses and safe hotels, we will not ever send a male investigator alone to those environments with young females, particularly those who've been trafficked, for a million reasons. But we also have instituted no transports that are done in high-risk cases are done by single person transports. And most of the time now, we use strategies that involve other cars and other equipment when we're moving people from place to place. And I'm going to credit my friends from the US Marshals with giving us major lessons and taking us to advanced trainings on transports, driving skills, as well as strategies. This is an important part. We have a staff person who handles our books, because we are usually doing things on the fly, and we are usually writing them down either in our phones or on a sticky pad. And that's not the way you run a successful program. So you've got to have the back office of witness protection. And that means that the hotels you work with understand your work, have been checked out and vetted to be reliable, and that there's direct bill that never is in the name of the people to be protected. Whether they're King Soopers cards or Safeway cards or Walmart cards or whatever it is, or transportation with Uber, these things have got to be relationships that are pre-done. Burner phones, disposable phones, all of those kinds of tactics are important to have in your toolbox when you're building a case-specific plan. None of it works. None of it works if you don't understand trauma and victim services. None of it. Go back here for a second. If I can get this larger, there we go. This is part of kind of the Bible of victim services, and that is acknowledging that there are 5 primary areas of impact on victims: physical, emotional, financial, social, and spiritual. And in an environment where you are doing witness protection, all 5 of these are challenged. And they're challenged at a time where they're already probably suffering some negative impacts in parts of their lives in these areas. And the ones that folks don't often talk about is you've lifted people out of their social environment, you've lifted them out of their social circle where they gain support, where they get to talk out what's gone on in their lives, and they're taken away from their spiritual support. They're not able to go to church on Sunday. Building that kind of relationship where you can match someone's spiritual needs with someone who can deliver that service and not compromise safety is really important. These 3 things you've got to be prepared for. The first 3, physical, emotional, and financial, you've got to be prepared for with resources. It's the key element of connecting and building trust and building reliable communication with the people you're trying to protect, is to show them you understand this. Not just that you understand it and you can talk about it, but that you can do something to mitigate these harms that will for sure show up in the vast majority of your people. I just skipped over I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. We'll come into this, but I had a slide that I'm not going to get back to about that talks about the impact of trauma on the brain. If you haven't been through a 101 course on the fact that trauma, PTSD, those kinds of things are real, they are chemical, they are biological, they are behavioral, and that you've got to have a basic understanding of them to understand why the behaviors that you see are inconsistent, that may be maddening to you as someone who's trying to help, but you're getting resistance and you're getting lies and you're getting changing stories. Much of that can be due to the trauma impact on the brain and the thought pattern and the memory pattern that people go through post-trauma. And then finally, I'm going to guess, it's not scientific, but I'm going to guess less than 5% of the cases we've worked over the years, and of the cases that my friends who are doing this work across the country deal with, are cases where people are just in the middle of a beautiful life and they get ripped out of that life by a crime, and all of a sudden they have to keep themselves safe, but everything else in their life is just fine. We had a case like that a few years ago. Really nice guy as an accountant. Went to the Cherry Creek Mall here, which is a beautiful mall, and bought himself a brand new iPad. And it was the brand new iPad that had just come out that day. And he had that pretty Apple plastic bag with a rope around it. And as he was leaving, some fool grabbed that bag and yanked on it hard enough that the rope that is at the top of the bag cut off his pinky finger. The security in the mall and the cops did a great job making the contact. This guy, the bad guy, was a gangbanger. And this poor man who went out to buy that Apple product had to turn his life upside down when the death threats started. But that is such a minority of the cases. What we deal with in most of the cases are self-esteem, substance abuse, human trafficking, family dysfunction, education and job training needs, community resources in order to survive and move forward with their lives and build their way out of the vulnerable environments that led them to be a part of the criminal justice system as a witness in the first place. So we must have resources that can do that. We have to provide wherever that person may be, and they may be in Denver or Colorado Springs or Fort Collins or Oklahoma City or Miami-Dade County, Florida, or anywhere else where we've moved people. They have to have not just access, not just a phone number to call and say, hey, call, but we need to build relationships where we're going to provide services in a way that they can take care of these. This list right here is dealing with these things is the bulk of whether you can create a comfortable, happy, productive life or not. When these things are disrupted, you can add a few more in there: domestic violence, the aftermath of sex assault, on and on. But these issues that come along with it have got to be addressed if you're going to do successful witness protection. This video doesn't want to work, Richard. So I'm going to skip over it. And I'm going to tell you that this is a story of a prosecutor, gang drug prosecutor in Texas, who was murdered by a cartel. And not long after he was murdered, his boss, the elected official, was murdered. And so I bring it up because we have, on 15 occasions in our office, we have had to protect our own staff. In a couple of 3 that I can't talk about, we have had to protect the judges in cases. But I will tell you that this is an extremely difficult part of our work because if these people are going to continue in their work, everyone knows where they're coming to work. And so this is something we take seriously. We've taken extreme measures. It is the highest priority of alleviating the threat for us. We pull out all the stops. If you're going to undermine the system by threatening to attack the people who work in that system, that's going to get our attention. Yeah, here we go.
Daylight this week of one of Texas's toughest prosecuting attorneys now has a small army of investigators working 7 days a week. Police say Mark Hassey was gunned down by 1 or perhaps 2 shooters right next to the Kaufman County Courthouse. His boss tells ABC News Hassey was fearless in putting the worst bad guys behind bars.
He ran across some of the baddest guys that there were in this part of the world.
Prosecutor of 30 years headed the organized crime and drug units in Dallas before moving to nearby Kaufman County, where he never backed down.
There's no police.
And that first speaker in the video, Mike, was murdered a short time after that by the same gang. So again, I need to implore you that this methodology that you build hits close to home. It impacts the entire office. It impacts the morale of the system. It scares the bejeebies out of young prosecutors with families and children. And so we've got to be at our best when we do this work. And I will tell you, we are. And this is another great chance for a discussion of the intelligence work that we do. This is when there's no confidential informant that's not contacted. There's no resource that we don't pull on. Our appellate division gets involved and helps us with the legal side of things. It's the most serious of the work that we do. A few things about the staff, and as I said earlier, we had 3 staff people, 2 men and a woman. One of the men is the quintessential cop who can roam the streets and talk to anybody about anything. He moved over to the Denver DA's office about 18 years ago, after about 20 some odd years on the streets. He's that guy that can go anywhere, talk to anyone. The woman on our team is tough as nails, probably tougher than the 2 guys. But she has a particular talent in using computer skills and the social media and being on top of all of that work. And our 3rd guy is and has been in the intelligence gathering business for a local sheriff's department for many, many years. And he has best friends in every intelligence unit and every law enforcement or corrections facility in Colorado and probably across the nation. So we have built a team that understands the breadth of skills that are necessary, that they understand communication, intelligence gathering, technology, and true collaboration. And they're willing to go and get the training they need to upgrade whatever skills there is that they need to build. And by golly, I will tell you, they work with difficult people and their patience level is to be admired. I can't overstate just how hard the work is on them. And the beauty of having that team is nobody understands the work they're doing, the uniqueness of what they're carrying around, other than the 4 of us. So if the 4 of us don't communicate and debrief regularly, we're shortening their lifespan with these particular skills that they have. A couple of lessons learned. There is no more challenging case for us. There's no more serious case for us than office personnel, but there's no more difficult case, complicated case than dealing with human trafficking victims. It is such a hard population to get and build and keep trust, and as well as keep them safe. And women and men who have been abused in this manner have developed a view of the world that is earned but not acceptable. And they need the patience and love and respect and resources of our work. We are, in these cases, a lifeline to people more so than in any other cases. Case management and resource utilization. I've gone over that a bunch. I'm going to restate it, that when you're working with human services and substance abuse and job training and anything else that you can come to mind, in one case, it was a relocation to another state of a very religious Jewish woman, and she would not have survived well if she didn't have access to a like conservative temple that was the center of her life here in Colorado. And we had to find a way to find that in the other state she was moving to. And so this is very much a people position. And it takes personal coaching and it takes all of that tactical work and intelligence work, but it is something that, there's a quote that we use here in one of our really high quality drug treatment programs. Only you can do it, but you cannot do it alone. Well, only you can be great at witness protection work, but you cannot do it alone. And so those are our lessons learned that we carry forward in our program. It's useful to spend a little bit of time on this topic because it's useless to have a good program in Denver or in New York City or wherever you may be from if we don't have a national link. If we don't build the kind of network that Parole has, that Joint Terrorism Task Force have, that all of the great networks that we have in our country and beyond, if we don't build those for witness protection, we will come up short because the world demands that. And these are the 7 pieces that I believe can go into that federal legislation that's pending again. And that is a broader understanding and research done about the Stop the Snitching movement and develop strategies to mitigate it. We've got to be able to share strategies, both legislative and programmatic, that are in place where the great work is being done in jurisdictions out there on the ledge by themselves. I will tell you that the U.S. Marshals, prior to COVID, did start 2 regions of information exchanges. One is the Eastern region that's run out of the U.S. Marshals Office in New York City. And they have been fantastic at bringing in trainers to teach and to share best practices. And then a smaller unit out here in Denver that includes states from the middle of the country. It is our hope that this becomes a regional reality across the United States and maybe beyond. We've got to be able to share lessons learned. We've got to be able to build and update and house in a safe environment a best practices toolkit. You can't just put it out there and Google it. You've got to have a resource guide to assist in interstate issues, which includes an interstate tactical task force. I can't send someone to Sarasota, Florida, and just tell them, get off the plane and figure it out. I've got to be able to send them to someone in Sarasota who does the work, believes in the quality of the work, and can take that person on. And I've got to be willing to accept them here in Colorado. And we need to be able to develop the national technology and data strategies and links to assist a nationwide effort to combat wherever this form of violence is, in fact, developing its own national strategies. So a network needs to be built, and the network needs to have federal legislation and state legislation and hardcore, talented, committed professionals to build that network. And of course, that translates into resources to do these things right. On the horizon, and this has been on the horizon for a while, will be a secure case management system that allows you to build your files in your jurisdiction and communicate when you need to deal with other jurisdictions. This again is my pitch about the interagency jurisdictional collaborations in Colorado that need to come across the nation. And we need to lean on our brothers and sisters in the Department of Justice, in prosecution, in the funding arms of the Department of Justice, in the FBI, in the Justice. I love the National Institute of Justice and the research they do. All of those people who serve in the Department of Justice, we would love to have them take the leadership role to help us build, and I'm not going to say build back better, build a nationwide network of protection for folks who participate in the system. And with that, I will turn this back over to Richard. I think we're kind of on point timing wise for doing our bring John and Jane back in. Is that right?
Yes, Stephen, you are dead on it. You're right on schedule.
John's trained me well.
We are going to open up our Q&A session. So if you have any questions that you have not had an opportunity to ask, just go ahead and click on that Q&A function and type in your question. And we'll actually stay with you, Stephen. We have a question in regards to funding sources for relocation in your experience with that. Can you give a little bit of background as far as where the programs that you worked with got their funding from, and if you have any additional feedback or comments about where folks can go for additional relocation funding?
You know, I love consistency in parts of my life. And one thing I can tell you, every time John and I have talked together, and probably every time I've talked about witness protection, the first question I get has to do with funding, because this ain't cheap. And our funding comes from a couple of three prime places. One is our state legislation creates a fund, a statewide fund that local jurisdictions can apply for, that pays for the costs per case. The second piece to that is about your collaboration. There is no way in heaven that we can pay the medical bills for a high-risk pregnancy, for paying for the education of a developmentally disabled young woman. Those things have got to be built into the collaborations you build, so that the professionals in the hospital can work with Medicaid and state funds to deal with the medical costs, and on and on and on. I'm not going to repeat all of those, but those kinds of things. The third place that you can hope to look for resources is the current bill that's been reintroduced from Representative Cummings. I believe had a $30 million price tag in it that would be available for local jurisdictions to apply for. And then the fourth place is to build relationships with the people who administer victim services in your state, whether it's statewide funding or VOCA funding. There are boards that do that, or administrators who do that. And we get serious money for doing this work, because everybody who's threatened is a victim of that crime. So they are victims of crime, not just witnesses to the other crime. And those are the four places that are primary for us. We also get and have gotten our city council to pick up the personnel in our unit and just make it a part of our regular budget. I guess I'd have to use the word lobbying, but I couldn't use that in a presentation like this. You need to convince, you need to convince the people who fund safe societies that they need to invest in witness protection to keep the criminal justice system and its integrity.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. I think this is a question for everyone. Do any of you do any collaborative work with Homeland Security investigations or any other federal agencies? I know Darlene will touch on this later on in this webinar, but if you guys have any answers for that particular question, all ears.
I'll jump in and then defer. First of all, having Darlene be our cleanup hitter, she's the best. She's just great. And she knows that Fed system as well as anyone does. We have worked with Homeland Security. We had a woman who was being stalked. She was in graduating nursing school in North Dakota, came down here to live and was being stalked by a foreign national. And we could not get enough of a case to put him away for long enough, but we got Homeland Security and INS involved and ICE involved, and they put together a great collaborative package to get this guy out of the country. There are times when there is nobody but Homeland Security who has the level of intelligence and ears to the ground that they have. And so building relationships with them is important, because they're not an easy entity to crack, and you have to establish your credibility in order to work with them. John?
And I mean, I don't prosecute anymore, but we of course would currently work with anybody who reached out to us. But just sort of going off of what Steve was just saying, being able to build those additional relationships, that collaboration, not just across the board in your own jurisdiction, but between the federal system and your own, can be super helpful. I think Project Safe Neighborhoods is a really great example of that, how that can be helpful. And just the feds have a lot of resources and are, at least my experience working with folks has been, they're very eager to help out. And so I encourage people from a small jurisdiction, even we had a relationship in Virginia. Larger jurisdictions seem to have more built-in relationships, but you can do it from a small jurisdiction as well.
And I'll just add like a different perspective, which is that Homeland Security is one of the primary investigating agencies that we see doing human trafficking work around the country. But they still have some challenges because they are so tied to ICE. And so when we look at it from the victims' side point of view, when we're working with foreign national victims, we may have to do a little bit of work to build a trusted relationship between them and Homeland Security. But they do have not only the tools to sort of do what Stephen was talking about, but they also can provide documentation that can support a victim's application for a U visa or a T visa or continued presence, which can be really strong strategies as far as us keeping victims safe and keeping them here to be able to testify in our cases.
Hey, Jane, did you pick up over the Zoom that I was trying to tell you to talk about U visas and T visas?
I must have just been feeling that vibe a little bit.
Yes. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the U.S. Marshals now under their policies can get involved in local cases, not just federal cases. There's a process that each office uses, but you can call on them to help you with local cases. And I will tell you where they have helped us. They have incredible toys, cars, cameras, protection, weaponry, staffing capacity. They know how to do this right, and they take great pride in their work. And it used to be that it had to be a federal case. That is not the case anymore.
So, and for those who are a part of a Project Safe Neighborhoods district or team, feel free to reach out to us. We've been getting a lot of questions and TTA asks for support for grant writing and finding other funding sources. So if this is something that you are interested in and something that your district needs, definitely reach out to the PSN TTA team and we can help you with that. Okay, looks like we have a question for everyone. If you have an undocumented person who comes to you for help, how can you offer them support, or how have you offered them support?
So I think I'll just expand a little bit on what I mentioned about the U visa, the T visa, continued presence. There's also the S visa and less formal process called deferred action. This would be enough information for a whole nother presentation. I work very closely with the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project, better known as NUOP, and put on a lot of trainings and a lot of resources to try to better understand what these forms of immigration relief are and what they are not. They often require, and the U visa definitely requires that some sort of law enforcement, prosecutor, judge, investigatory agency sign off saying, hey, this victim is a victim of one of these qualifying crimes. Witness intimidation and tampering being one of those crimes that does qualify a person to apply for a U visa if they've been helpful or expected to be helpful in the case. It's a pretty technical thing to go through on a Q&A session, but I would recommend looking into those resources because they really were enacted by the legislature to be crime fighting tools to help law enforcement, to help prosecutors, keep victims safe, keep them in the country, and have them be able to participate in our investigations and prosecutions. And so your local immigration attorneys, advocates, and national TTA providers such as Equitas and NUOP can really provide even more information about how to support victims that are undocumented and might have those fears with participating in our system.
Thank you, Jane.
I saw a question come up. I thought it was a question, maybe it was a chat about mental health. You know, I've been in this business a long time, and I have been preaching, I probably ought to listen to myself more often, but I've been preaching self-care for the people who do our work for a lot of years. And it's not just investigators, and it's not just cops, and not just prosecutors, but when you come in regular contact with the worst things that human beings can do to each other, you better find a way to get those toxins out of your body. We went and started our response for our brothers and sisters in Oklahoma after the Murrah building explosion, and the chief religious person for the FBI gave us a big lecture, and he said, if you don't learn how to talk this out, how to dance it out, how to draw it out, how to sing it out, it will come out in your behavior, in substance abuse, in depression, in inability to do your job the way you should, impacting your relationships with those you love. So self-care, you're not worth a damn if you're not taking care of yourself.
And I'm gonna start sounding like Project Safe Neighborhoods, like marketing officer or something like that. But again, this is something else, another topic that we have done a lot of TTA support for, and it's extremely important, especially those working with victims and survivors face to face, to have those type of support systems in your agencies and your organizations. And we definitely do encourage those folks here today to reach out. I see someone over here drop the OVC has a fantastic tool, the Vicarious Trauma Toolkit. Yes, wonderful toolkit. Looks like they dropped the link as well. So yeah, definitely reach out to us for any additional TTA support for those topics as well. Let's see if we have any more questions. Is anyone aware of levels of intimidation, levels of intimidation document? It looks like they have a supervisor who took a training with an FBI agent who presented for part of it, but yeah, they basically couldn't find no information. So does anyone know about a resource that is out there for that particular topic?
You know, I'm going to second down on that referral. If you go to the OVC resource library, online resource library, you're likely to find it there.
I was just going to say, I'm not familiar with, and I'm not 100% sure what levels of intimidation is referring to. We do have some resources related to different types of intimidation that occur at different places in our field guide, which I think you can access on our website, that lays it out in sort of a way like that.
And we shouldn't have gotten this far into this without mentioning Dave Thomas is up on deck with the IACP. And they've been doing victim work and this kind of intimidation work for longer than I can count. And you'll be getting a lot of good update information from Dave.
Awesome. So it does look like we are coming to the end of our Q&A session.